And action.
Hello and welcome to A Gypsy's Kiss, the vlog. I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Stick with us for a couple of seconds and we will tell you about our adventure to the Denver Museum.
Oh, good. We got our notifications. So everybody should get notified immediately today.
That we're actually on the air?
Yes. But if you'd like to go ahead and share that anyway, that would be terrific. And we have Jimmy Fast here already.
Hey, Jimmy.
He is fast.
Welcome aboard.
So awesome.
Good. It means people are getting their notifications about today's show.
Yes.
Thank you, YouTube. Finally.
Yeah. After 2 weeks of...
Jimmy, how's the audio?
Man in the Barn is here.
Hey, man.
And Matt.
Matt, the suspense.
This is Matt.
The suspense.
So,
okay.
Where are we at?
So, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about...
Share that anyway. That would be
sorry.
terrific.
I'm going to talk twice about the Denver Museum and our trip and what we learned and why we went and all that good stuff.
Good. But first...
Housekeeping. Presentation followed by an open Q&A. So you know our presentation will be about the Denver Museum. And then we'll have a conversation with our viewers immediately after. Moderators, we have Jimmy Fast, Man in the Barn, are both here today and still designated. And if you guys ever get tired of that and you say, I don't want to do that anymore, just let us know. But we do appreciate you guys moderating and watching those comments for us while we're busy chatting. Super Chat. We have Super Chat available to you. It's a $ icon that's down. It's gray, and you can click on that, and you can donate money to the Super Chat fund. And when you do that, your name appears in a brightly colored box, and we see your comment, big and bright.
Or question.
Comment or question. And your name, and we send out a special thanks to you for that, and then we'll make sure that we answer any questions you have for the rest of that day.
Mr. Ely says, hola.
Oh, who?
So here, Mr. Eli.
Okay.
So you're going to tell him what we're going to do in Spanish? What was your Spanish thing?
That was for Cinco de Mayo.
Oh, okay, we're going to save that for Cinco. Okay.
Yeah. Open Q&A following the presentation, so you can ask any question you'd like from us. It does not have to be specifically about the Denver Museum. And Toby wants to take a moment to specially thank Michael Maddox, so tell them why.
Michael made it a point to send me an email to say that someone had started copying our videos and putting them into their own YouTube channel. Turned out that someone was in Russia. And so after 30 years working for the intelligence community, here's what I can tell you. The Russians, are, for the most part, are good people. Just like Americans, for the most part, are good people. Russia as a government is not our friend, and Vladimir Putin is not our friend, and it wouldn't surprise me to find out that Vladimir stole our videos.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
I don't think he'd put our...
But I wanted to thank Mike for letting us know. We have a process for that with YouTube where we talk about copyright infringement, and they take care of it for us. We don't actually have to do anything except report it. So thanks for letting us know. And if you ever see one of our videos on another channel, let us know, and we'll submit the copyright infringement.
Yes,
thing.
we appreciate that because...
Why am I... Wait, let me turn off...
I'm sharing.
Oh, okay.
That's all it is.
All right.
I just shared the video. We appreciate when you guys can help us police the internet, you know. People try to take our content, or we get spammers in our chat, and you guys are there to help us out and watch our back, and we really appreciate that. It makes it a lot more fun for everybody when we have those people who can, you know, keep an eye on that for us. So, are we ready to hit it?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's hit it.
So I want to talk a little bit, we want to talk today a little bit about our Denver Museum adventure. We want to talk a little bit about why we went. We want to talk about what we ended up calling the Fenn final option. And then we want to talk very little about what's there for you if you're searching in Colorado. As you know, we are not, but I'll explain to you what happened during our trip. So if you remember correctly, either last week or the week before, one of the recommendations I made to you was not to put a high level of confidence in anything Fenn said after December 31st, 2012. And we believe that that was the point at which Fenn made a conscious decision about how he was going to handle this search. And he was going to turn it into a larger than the thrill of the chase marketing effort that included the, at that time, Too Far to Walk, and then later on, Once Upon a While. So the question then is, well, if that was true, then how did you end up in Denver? And the simple fact of the matter is, according to what?
Nothing.
Oh, so according to Douglas Preston, he and Fenn had this conversation in his vault sometime in the early 90s. So Fenn did say it before December of 2012. My estimation is that he said it 10 to 15 years before he started seriously thinking about the thrill of the chase and turning this into a memoir and making it part of the memoir. Up until that time, probably as late as 2004, 2005, it was simply, I'm going to hide a treasure and I'm going to leave behind a set of clues in the form of a poem. So it because he said it and because Preston confirmed that he said it before 2012, it fits into that time frame. So Preston writes this into the foreword of Once Upon a While, writes it pretty obviously. Fenn edits the foreword, I'm sure, Once Upon a While, and allows it to stay.
Well, he's the one that sent it out, wasn't he?
Yeah,
so
but
obviously
Preston
read it.
Yeah. So we have to assume that Fenn agrees with what was said, that if he hadn't said anything about the Denver Museum, he would have asked Preston to edit that out. So at that point, we felt like we had to not necessarily go look for a clue in the Denver Museum. At that point, as good intelligence operatives are wont to do, we had to eliminate it so that it didn't confuse our solution. So we went as much to eliminate it as a possibility as we did, to find anything there. Hoping that if we did find something, it would help us with our New Mexico solution. So here's the first thing that we found out. So Shelley and I walked into the museum on Thursday. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we walked into the museum on Thursday. We checked in. For those of you that have a military ID card, you're let in for free, which I thought was a pretty damn good deal. Shelley came in as a adult. She's not a senior citizen yet, so she had to pay the adult fee, and I think it was $16 or $18, but I was let in for free. We walked into the museum. The first thing I always do when I get into a museum, although I had done some internet research on it prior to that, was get a map of the museum. It has 3 viewable levels where they have the various exhibits. It's a very well laid out museum, a lot of open space. We happened to hit the day where it was Denver School Kids Day. I don't know whether it's like that all the time.
I think it's like that all the time.
You think?
I'm going to guess.
And they were running around everywhere, so we had to accommodate that idea that they could do damage to me being an old person and everything. So I looked at the map, and the first thing that I noticed was there wasn't any location that was dedicated to what I would refer to the Paleolithic. And a lot of what we wanted to be there was a reference to the Paleolithic period that is somewhere around 15,000 years ago in the Southwest. And it was curious to me, but at the same time, they had a dinosaur exhibit, which of course is not 15,000 years. It's more like 65 million, 130 to 65 million years ago. And then they have what I would call the modern era of the North American, of Southwestern Native American cultures. And I would call it more rather than prehistory, I would call it historical, the period in which we have documentation, either native or substantiation, archaeological substantiation of those tribes and their behaviors and their cultures during that period. But that was closer to 8,000 years ago rather than the 15,000 Paleolithic period. We headed for the Native American exhibit first. And literally by the time I walked through that exhibit, I think at that point, I turned to Shelley and I said, it's not here. There's nothing here for us. And I explained to her why I thought so. Shelley was more open and wanted to see some of the other exhibits. And so we stayed in the museum and did look at a lot of the other exhibits and enjoyed them. Their exhibit on the environments, the various environments in Colorado, or not the ecological zones in Colorado and how they're explained was very informative and, gave us some new insights to the ecology of Colorado. The gem exhibit was very well done. They put a lot of money into it. And if you've never seen a rhodochrosite, either raw or one that's been polished, it has to be. I had never seen one prior to this. I didn't even know the gem existed, actually, or the stone existed, and it really is a really good-looking stone. I was impressed with it, and have been looking for one since. So we went through the museum, and I think we were there probably, including a visit to the museum library, and honestly, that was really interesting because the first thing we spoke to the librarian, and we spoke to. I did a research using the digital catalog. We found that they had two of Fenn's books, The Secrets of San Lazaro and the Teepee Smoke. And when I spoke to the librarian about them, she said that they were missing the books on San Lazaro because they had, through the National Lending Library Program, loaned them out to another library, and neither had been returned. So somebody used that as a mechanism to get their copies of The Secret of San Lazaro, which I think is pretty chintzy. But the only thing that I found that was even close was an academic journal white paper on the Folsom cache of points that was discovered in eastern New Mexico, and that just didn't fit. So between not finding anything in the museum, not finding anything in the library that we thought would be helpful to us in terms of our New Mexico solution, we have eliminated as such, and I'm going to qualify that at the end of the presentation here. So.
We did spend some time in that diorama area where they had the different ecological zones set up behind glass. The children were running in and out and hither and yon. And we talked about how Fenn could have sat there and thought, these children really need to be outdoors in those actual zones and running through the forest rather than running through the museum. And we talked about the J.D. Salinger Catcher in the Rye book and the similarity between Fenn and his own museum and how the children were behaving, how they had to be quiet and be respectful and not run and not touch things. And then, until his presentation was done, he would give a presentation in his museum to the children, and he loves children, and he would want to teach them, and then he would allow them to touch a particular painting or something that he had chosen for them. So we had a good long discussion about how Fenn might have felt sitting there watching those children run around.
Where we were, watching them around, because there was nothing about it that gave you the impression that it was J.D. Salinger's perception of how a child behaved in a museum, and certainly not Forrest Fenn's perception of how a child would behave in a museum. They really were pretty much running wild. I don't think we saw one group that was organized. We saw a lot of teachers trying to organize it, but organization consisted mostly of saying, "Hey, get your ass back here." So,
They didn't say that.
no, it didn't say that. But
They,
so the only place that we thought was useful to us, this is one of the photographs that we took. And by the way, I posted a number of the photographs that we took. I think if we had discovered anything more, we would have taken a lot more photographs. But I posted those to gypsieskiss.com, which is our blog. You can see them in pretty high resolution there. The only place that we found was interesting was literally a small exhibit at the end of the
it was a journey through time.
Journey Through Time
Starts
exhibit.
with the Big Bang and
Right.
goes all the way through
Goes through time,
dinosaurs. Right?
focusing on the era of the dinosaurs. That's 130 million to around 65 million years ago, which is not in and of itself a short period, let's face it. But the only thing that there was a small exhibit at the end of all that on the Paleolithic that included this in situ diorama of the combination of a point, and to me it looks more like a Folsom point than a Clovis point, that was found along with these bison bones. Now that happened to be right next to the laboratory where they were actually doing some work, and I posted some photos of that, and I think we
There's
uploaded.
a video on Instagram.
There's an Instagram video on that as well, of the laboratory where they were doing work that was dealing with the Paleolithic rather than no. I'm sorry, that was the
Dinosaur.
that was the
Torosaurus.
Torosaurus. Right. So we were back in the period of the dinosaurs, which I think is
Right.
Censozoic.
They had discovered a Torosaurus skull in Thornton, Colorado, just this last summer, and they had 4 ladies working on it, cleaning it up, removing dirt and debris, and leaving the fossilized bone skull. They had originally thought it was a Triceratops, but then they discovered that there was an opening in the frill, and that meant that it was a Torosaurus, and the beak was smaller than the Triceratops.
Yeah, they
I
were
learned
there.
a lot.
You did learn a lot. The gentleman that explained it to us was very kind. I had the opportunity, as usual, when we go out, I always drop the Forrest Fenn story to the people to whom we're talking, to see if there's any reaction to it. I ended up speaking to a couple of docents that were there, telling them the story, and although they were fascinated enough to take out their smartphones and start looking up Forrest Fenn, they had no idea of what we were talking about, no
There's a
concept.
picture of that on our Instagram,
Yeah.
too.
So I did my pitch the Forrest Fenn story to people who just literally.
Yeah, and then they're like, "Oh, you need to talk to so and so," and yeah,
Oh, Shelley.
Shelley.
Yeah, they told us we needed to talk to Shelley, but that she was downstairs. It turned out that we bumped into her accidentally on our way out of the building. She was in the space exhibit. So we talked to her, brought it up to her, and nothing there. Librarians, nothing. So it's, again, it's funny how much time we spend focused on this in our lives, and pretty much, except for the searchers that have joined us in this adventure, or Fenn, rather, in this adventure. There's not a lot of other people who do. So we weren't disappointed. We had a good time. We had a
Yeah.
great time in Denver. We got to eat at some great places.
I got some gift from the gift store.
Is that the citrine?
Yeah.
We bought, we bought Shelley a couple of pieces of jewelry from, they have a really great gift store, by the way. And I think I could have spent as much time there as in the museum, because I'm a big fan of museum gift stores. So we bought some stuff. I bought some rocks.
Yep.
And
We have to take some pictures of those and put them up on the.
yeah, I'm going to put those on the. I'll put those. I'm going to do close-ups of those, macro shots of those, and put them up on our Instagram account. So let's go on to the final, what we call the final option. We had this trip to Denver. We had a lot of time on the way back, partially because of our, I don't want to say disappointment. We weren't disappointed. We didn't have great expectations for it. For us, it was as much a vacation as anything else. But we had a lot of time to talk about why the Denver Museum. Why did this even come up as a topic? And it had to do with the fact that Fenn wanted to resolve the issue of what he was going to do with his vehicle after he hid the treasure in a special place. And in the foreword, Preston writes, the final clue, he said, would be where they found his car in the parking lot of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And I think there's a couple of ways to interpret that. One is the clue the fact that the car is parked in the parking lot, which is one way to interpret it, would be where they found his car. The next way to interpret it is that in his car, the final clue he said would be where they found his car in the parking lot of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So one way to interpret it is there was something in the car that would have been left behind. So the question is, what would have been the clue that was in the car? So as Preston goes on in the foreword to discuss this, he says he had worked out all the logistics except one, how he could pull this off by himself. That is, how could he hide the treasure someplace, go to the Denver Museum, leave his car there, and get back to where the treasure was, because he said he wanted to die where the treasure was. So that means he had to get back from the museum to the point at which the treasure, but what confounded Fenn at that time was how he could do it without involving someone else in the process, which is a hard thing to do. And then he went back to his favorite phrase, which is two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. And while he would have been dead, there was still somebody alive who would have known kind of what this plan is all about. What was the idea that you came up with?
Oh, that he would have, somebody drive to the Denver Museum, but drop him off at Red River.
Or someplace like that.
Yeah.
And then take the car up there and get back on their own.
Yeah.
Still, you got that. One of you would have to be shot before he was. So he had already, Preston says he had already written the poem, and now he brought it out and read it to me. It was similar to the poem he later published in his book, but not exactly according to his recollection. It wasn't exactly the same. He tweaked it many times over the years, making it harder. So the question is, what was that poem? What did that poem look like? Fenn, if you go to the our Moby Dickens video, Fenn tells us. He says several things. I decided I knew where I was going to hide the treasure. I told myself with the last gasping breath I was going to go out there and fling myself on top of that treasure chest and let my bones go back to the dirt. By the time he wrote, by the time he made the decision to publish The Thrill of the Chase and include the poem in The Thrill of the Chase, I think that dream of his, he'd given up on that dream. There was no sense that he needed to get back. And as a matter of fact, he didn't have a solution to all of this in order to get back and throw his bones on the treasure. Then later on in Moby Dickens, he says, these are Fenn's words, the original version of the poem said, take the treasure chest, but leave my bones and go in peace, or something like that. So our conclusion is that the poem that Fenn was referring to and that Preston saw was the poem that contained the line, one or more lines relating to leaving his bones and taking the chest and going in peace. So what does that mean generally? So at the time, the conclusions that we've come to is at the time that what I call the Denver statement was made in the early 1990s, there was Fenn had no intent that what would result in all this is a treasure that was hidden, the consideration of writing a memoir, and then the publishing of that memoir so that it included the poem. I think his solution to his problem was much simpler than he was going to hide the treasure, die with the treasure, and leave a poem behind somehow. All of that was going to happen. So that was where he was early in the 1990s. I've concluded that the whole Thrill of the Chase book and all of that, especially when you consider the number of the original printing, which was around 5,000, it was an afterthought. There was no plan for that in the early 1990s. So then Fenn's thought was that he would hide his treasure and he would drive from there to the Denver Museum. And the last clue that is referred to by Fenn, we believe, is that his poem would have been left with his car. The poem describing with a line that said, just take the chest, leave my bones. So why the Denver Museum? Well, the Denver Museum is exemplary in its neutrality. It's not in the forest. It doesn't necessarily have anything that would indicate why that car was there. We discovered while we were there that the parking lot, there's two parking lots basically. There's an above-ground parking lot, below-ground parking lot. The above-ground parking lot is the responsibility of the city of Denver. They maintain it and they patrol it. The below-ground parking lot is the responsibility of the museum. They maintain it, and they have a private corporation that patrols it along with providing the other security for the museum. So it was perfectly neutral. It also means that eventually his car would have been discovered by someone, and after a couple of days they would have had to open it and start whatever process for searching or announcing or figuring out who Forrest Fenn was and what this poem meant in the grand scheme of things. Now, you have to remember, this was before, in Fenn's mind, and in the what Preston has said about it, before what I call pre-9/11 security. No cameras, no tracking with IDs. Even when you did need an ID, there was no tracking with it. It was simply to prove who you were, and it was not used as a source for tracking. So if he had left his car there, it would have given him a couple of days to finish up, and the car would eventually have been discovered, and it would have led to questions. It would have been opened, and sure enough, there would have been a poem, and some attorney sitting in a district attorney's office inside Denver in Aurora County courthouse would have opened up that poem, made an announcement, and said, this is all we have. And the nice thing about Denver is it gives him neutral, what I'll refer to as neutral transportation, lots of neutral transportation options that he wouldn't have otherwise had. So the question then goes to what do I mean by the neutral transportation options? Interestingly, one of the things that we did find in the museum was one of those stick charts. I saw something similar, and I posted a photo about it, connecting the dots, lines and dots. When I was in the Frost Museum of Science in Miami, the Denver Museum also has one of these examples. And I thought to myself about tradecraft. And tradecraft has changed over the years, but back in the 90s, one of the, scions of one of the, I don't want to say it's rules, but one of the concepts in good tradecraft was that if you wanted to get lost, you had as many sticks and shells, you used as many sticks and shells to cover your trail as you could, because eventually, back then, before the 2011 security, you could get lost because you could do it without leaving a paper trail. And as a matter of fact, in Europe, or either Western Europe or Eastern Europe, the trains gave you that opportunity because it was easy to take rail transportation without using. You could buy a ticket with an identification and cash and move on, and you could make as many stops as you wanted, as many locations as you wanted, and then whenever you chose, you could get off the rail and start going to other forms of transportation up to and including your feet. So that's what I was reminded of that kind of tradecraft, and so I had to work it out. What would I had done had I been Forrest Fenn and I had just hidden a treasure, and this was before 2011 9/11 security.
2001.
2001 9/11 security. I'm sorry. Did I say 2011? I'm sorry. I meant 2001 security. What I would have done is I would have taken a backpack with me, and I would have put it in the trunk of my car or the back end of my vehicle, and it would have been a regular backpack with camping equipment and camping and survival equipment, and it had a multi-piece fly fishing rod sticking out of it, so that it was very obvious that I was taking a fishing rod with me. And I would take the city bus to the Greyhound station in Denver. It leads, one of the city bus lines leads directly there. All you need to do is throw some change in the box. Now there's cameras on those buses. Back then there weren't. No ID was required. You'd go to the Greyhound bus station and you would buy a ticket, and you could pay cash for the ticket. No ID was required, nor was the ticket in your name at that time. So it's completely neutral. You could take that Greyhound bus pretty much to any location anywhere in the United States, including any one of the locations, any one of the 4 treasure states, including those small towns. Now, even better, you might have had to take other buses in the process of getting to exactly the small town you wanted. What you're looking for is the small town that's closest to where warm waters halt. So you'd get to that small town, you'd take time to go for lunch, you'd start talking to some folks and finding out who was headed in the direction that you were headed, and you would bum a ride. And you'd have your fishing rod, and your story would be that you're going fishing. And the ride you would bum, one or more of those rides that you would bum, would basically take you to what I would call the put-in below the home of Brown. And at that point, you're near fishing. It looks perfectly rational. You're going camping, and that's your story. Now, eventually, those people might have read a story about a car in a Denver museum, but the likelihood of any one of them putting it all together and recognizing that there was something special about what you were doing and putting the poem together and then coming to the conclusion that, oh my God, I just dropped the guy off that left his car in the Denver Museum, and I left him over there below the Brown trailer park. I don't know, wherever the home of Brown is. The likelihood of that putting together, especially the more of those things that you used, the more of those bumming of rides that you used to get to your location, the more of those buses that you took to get to your location. So it is possible. It's actually good tradecraft if you know what you're doing. It's a lot easier in places like Europe where you did have the train system. It's more difficult today than it would have been then because of the post 9/11 security that includes literally millions of more cameras, millions of more people with cameras, internet communications that are broad and varied even into those small towns, et cetera, et cetera. But back then, it was perfectly plausible. You could have gotten away with it. So I think that was his final option, and I think he could have gotten away with it, and I think that's how we felt about the Denver Museum. So that leaves us with what else did we find there? So I don't want to be mysterious, but here's what I'll say to you, because you all know that we constantly reinforce that we believe that the treasure is in New Mexico. But if you believe that the treasure is in Colorado, and you were looking in Colorado, if you go to this room in the Denver Museum, I believe you will find a very helpful hint. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay, Forrest Gump.
And that's what does he say? And
That's all I'm going to say.
That's all I have to say about that.
That's right.
The other Forrest. Yeah. Okay, so.
Oh no! Look at me getting stepped on by a dinosaur.
By a dinosaur. 65 minutes. You look better than the dinosaur.
Well, that's because I have skin on my bones.
Okay, I think that's all I got.
Yeah.
You want to go to some Q&A?
Before we do that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have super chat from B Cross. That's Bill, right?
Bill Cross.
From Texas. Right?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. We appreciate
Cross. It. We appreciate that.
Does he have a question?
He just gave us money.
That's nice. We appreciate you just sending us some money in Smart Chat, but you should also take advantage of it and ask a question, because your question goes right to the top, so we'll answer that first.
Okay. And
Lots of questions.
lots of hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
We had a good time in
Hi.
Denver. We're sorry we know there was a couple of people that we wanted to meet, but we just didn't end up staying long enough, and I didn't want to waste time on something that, although Denver's a nice place to visit, I didn't want to waste time in some place that we weren't going to get any benefit from. If we're going to do research, we can do it back here.
And that the audio is good.
It's bouncing off the red here. I'm kind of worried that
They said it was a little loud, but
Yeah. better
clear.
loud than not. Yeah, if you start hearing it clip, and the clip sounds like a little break, and because Shelley's voice is different, she has more pitch going up and down, and so it'll break in hers. If you hear Shelley's breaking, just let me know.
not a question, but Craig Fold says he really enjoyed the Riddle and Fenn's poem video.
Oh, thank you. We enjoyed doing it.
Okay.
Can I help?
Did they have exhibits that show other states? David Dow.
Yes. So they cover a lot of territory. The exhibits that covered other states that might have been of interest to you is in the North American Native American United States. I don't know how they said it. I have a picture of it someplace. It's the North American Native American exhibit.
Or Native tribes.
Native tribes and cultures exhibit, which I think was on the 3rd floor. And there are some maps in there that could give you some indications and refer to the western states, including New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and Arizona, Nevada, some Nevada. But it's that Great Basin area where we find a lot of the southwestern Native American cultures.
And then the gems, they had gems and stones from around the world, but the main focus was Colorado.
Yeah, I was very impressed because I used to watch a show on the Weather Channel called The Prospectors, and they had these several personalities on there, and I used to follow them week to week. I haven't seen it recently. But one of them was a guy whose name was Steve Barcano, and it turns out that he has this, and he was kind of a sloppy prospector, honestly. I didn't get the sense he was very serious because he was always looking for another location. Turns out that he has a major exhibit that he donated or sold, and then somebody donated to the museum on his behalf. And then they have a short documentary in which they've interviewed him and other people about this particular exhibit. It has to do with, was it tourmalines? Quartz tourmaline? The quartz tourmaline find?
Oh.
Tourmaline?
No, you don't blue, remember. Whatever blue is.
Yeah. or not amethyst. Tourmaline, yeah. Which apparently is...
Whatever's blue.
Well, it's Colorado State stone, isn't it?
Is it? Okay.
Okay. Anyway, the gem...
I didn't pay as much
attention. The gems exhibit had some maps that referenced the area. The other maps were up in the Southwestern Native American Cultures exhibit.
Yeah. And Mary Green points out that exhibits change year to year at most museums. I have a feeling they have particular things that will change, but for the most part, everything seemed very established. They were going to be putting in the one that we didn't get to see because it wasn't there yet. The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah,
that's coming, and that I think is an area where they change it out.
Right.
But I think the parts that we saw all stay the same.
I would say that the museum. It was my impression that the museum is 75%. In exhibits in place, that means they're there for the time, and then 25% worth of room for different traveling exhibits. The one that they had in place already was on the Pharaohs, on Egypt and the Pharaohs, which looked like a temporary exhibit. Mm-hmm. And then the one that was coming, I think it's in March or April. March was the exhibit on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And honestly, I'd like to go back and see that. I've always had an interest in that topic.
Mm-hmm. That should be there for, 6 months or so,
mm-hmm.
they
That's
said?
what they said, yeah.
Let's see.
Okay, I've got one here.
Okay.
So, Redneck Express says, AGK, why do you think the car location reported from Preston changed from the original Northern Arizona U location to the Denver Museum? I don't have any evidence that it did. I believe there is one searcher who indicated that Preston said that to them. I don't consider that evidence. I don't know that Preston has ever, if there's documentation in which Preston has ever said that it was ever the Northern Arizona University, but I don't think it would have made any difference. The plan that I described that took place in the Denver Museum could have actually taken place anywhere I could have gotten to a Greyhound bus. And so it actually wouldn't have made any difference where it was, because I don't think, from our perspective, the clue was in the museum. So, and that means to me there wouldn't have been any clue for us in Northern Arizona either. We think it was a neutral location pre 9/11 that gave him the opportunity to lose himself with good tradecraft.
And Denver's a much bigger city than Flagstaff. Just throw in my 2 cents on that.
Yeah.
So it's easier to get lost in a big city than a small town like that.
Exactly. From
And
Sh-
NAU is a very small university.
Yeah,
My
it
nephew
was-
went there, and he liked it because it was
It
so
was
small.
small, yeah. So from Sean NM, AGK, I believe that the final clue has nothing to do with one location. DMNS, as mentioned in Once Upon a While, as the final clue would not be where he parked his car, not the museum in itself. Yeah, that was one of our interpretations, Sean. Okay, so we are going
Aquamarine says
Aquamarine. Yeah.
to Brewmeister. Is that it?
Yeah.
It was Aquamarine? Okay. Matt wants to know, what kind of map would you recommend to use in searching?
So I think you need to use 3 maps. I think you need to use Google Earth to get you to warm water salt. Then I think you need to use the BLM maps, quadrant maps, to determine what kind of land you're on, because the BLM maps are the best at telling you exactly which type of land you're on, whether it's grant land, private land, BLM land, forest land, whether it's state or national, park land, whether it's state or national, monument land, whether it's state or national. The BLM maps have the best information when it comes to what kind of land you're on. And then, depending on where you are, you'll need either a good topographic map for your area. Now, we've discovered that most topographic maps just simply don't give you the detail that you're going to find when you're like everything else, when you're boots on the ground. It's nice to have the topographic map to give you a sense of where your jump-off point is. But then your boots on the ground and what you should have with you if you're not comfortable in the outdoors, you should have a tracking GPS so that you can get back to your car, because it's really easy to get lost. And at some point, the map is not going to help you once you're lost. When you're lost, you're lost.
Unless you're really good at maps.
So Google Earth, BLM maps, and topographic, but then boots on the ground. There's no substitute for boots on the ground.
Rick Plank wants to know, do you still think that he hid the treasure in 2003?
You know, I struggle with that, Rick. There is nothing to me to indicate there is no reason for him not to have hidden it in 2003. And the reason is it gave him more flexibility. One conversation I was having with someone recently was that maybe he hid the chest in 2003, but not the treasure. I still believe there's a very good possibility that, based on exactly what he said at Moby Dickens, it was 15 years between the time he got cancer, 1988, and when he hid the treasure, 2003. And he said it twice. And that's a pretty significant statement. And if you look at it, it was Fenn in his rawest form. So I don't think he was calculating at that point. I think he was saying what was in his head. So yes, I still believe there's a very good possibility that Fenn hid the treasure in 2003.
Okay.
Or in that time frame, rather than sometime between 2003 and 2010, when he was 80.
JL wants to know, what's the room in the museum for the Colorado clues?
Yeah, you have to find that out yourself.
Can I give him a hint? It's the oldest exhibit in the museum.
Oh, good hint.
Yeah.
Good hint.
If you just ask a docent, I'm sure they can tell you what that answer is. Let's see. Any idea? Well, I don't know how to answer that. Maybe you do. Any idea why Forrest has said to simplify, but has also said not to simplify too much?
Forrest being Forrest. The most recent one, and I believe, as someone gets closer to, there's something about getting closer to the end of your life that makes you more honest, more clear about things. And so in this most recent interview, which I think will be amongst the last interview that we see Forrest in, although I'm hesitant to use it as credible because of the amount of cutting that they did. But when he says simplify and you're making it too complex, he's had, 7, almost 8 years to evaluate how searchers are going to treat the search and what they're going to find out about it. And when you look at him and when he answers the question, it's almost as if his brow was furrowed. It's almost as if it was like, these guys are silly. They're making it too complex. And his last piece of advice was simplify it. You're overthinking it. And he has said not to overthink it. He has said not to bring things into it that have nothing to do with his poem. So I would say that the closer Fenn gets to the end of his life, the more honest he's going to be with us. And whether or not we get any additional information from him, I think the chances are slim to none. So I'm going to go with his last recommendation. That is, don't overcomplicate it.
Chris Bischoff wants to know, what's the approximate travel time by car from the Denver Museum to the majority of your New Mexico targets?
From the Denver Museum to our New Mexico targets is 3.5 hours.
Okay. I hope I didn't skip anything. Let's see. What do you think of his search? This is from Philly at 1. What do you think of his search around Tarryall, Colorado, as it used to be called Terry Graball? I don't know what that means. Terry Graball, it too.
I can't give you a credible answer. I can't give you a credible answer to your question. I don't know about any of those locations, and we have to constantly admit that we believe the treasure we believe, Shelley and I believe, the treasure is hidden in New Mexico. So.
And Chris also said Steve Brancato.
Steve Brancato, that was it. So, and if you watch the Prospectors, he was kind of a obtuse character on that. And actually went through a couple of partners. So he was the, Tony Beats of the Prospectors. But he has a hell of an exhibit, and I'm sure it made him a ton of money because he would have sold it to someone who then could have donated it as an exhibit to the Denver Museum. So.
Let's see, Joey Perro. I read a book about musical note groupings. In other words, a different way of mentally and physically interpreting linear bar lines. Do you think a different process of reading the poem may help? I think you're getting away from simplifying at that point.
Yeah, it is possible. Any of those things is possible, but it strikes me that the one thing that Fenn, to me, has never indicated an interest in, with all the interests that he has, is music.
Yeah.
So I'd be surprised if it had anything to do with music.
Mm-hmm.
It would have required him to learn another field, music and mathematics, both of which there's nothing in Fenn's background that indicates to me that he had an interest in either of those subjects. And they're both right brain or left brain. I never remember. Music and math, they're on the same side of the brain, but.
Are you still, this is from Cal Lazars, are you still hiding?
Hey, Mike.
Are you still hiding coins? Was the last one found?
Yeah, if you weren't with us last week, we mentioned that the last one was found. It was in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and it was placed there for us by our friend
Clayton.
And Clayton had found treasure number 2 and then added money to it and hidden it for us in Copper Breaks Park, State Park, Texas. And apparently he was informed by a family that they had accidentally found it. They didn't know anything about the treasure or Gypsy's Kiss, but their kids had been playing amongst the rocks where they found the first, the what we would call the second set of clues, and from there followed it to the treasure, to the coins, the container of coins. And but one of the reasons we did that was to see if there was any interest in that kind of thing, and we had a sense just based on numbers that it wasn't very interesting. So we probably won't do another. Maybe if we happen to be in an area where we're searching, that's kind of what prompted it the last time. We might do it again, but we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it a significant part of our program.
Somebody wants to talk to you on Messenger or someplace. Where can they write to you at?
Write us at gypsieskiss@gmail.com. I will tell you what our rules are. We ask you not to share your solutions with us. We are not interested in partnerships, and if you want us to go look for your solution, we charge for that. And so just before you start writing us, those are some of the things that we
already have each other, so we're not looking for any new partners.
we're happy with the partners we have.
Martin Katz, why are you crossing Colorado off your list? Has nothing changed, or is there new data that further confirmed your previous conclusion?
Okay, so one of the ways that you have to look at is you have to look at intelligence from at least two perspectives, whether or not it confirms your conclusion or whether or not it has nothing to do with your conclusion. In this case, it didn't. Our visit to Colorado did not change our belief in our current solution, which is in New Mexico. There was nothing in Colorado that contradicted what we already believed.
So we're just going there to eliminate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Stephen Marilat, could home of Brown be home of Anasazi? Are Anasazi located in the Rocky Mountains?
It's a stretch if you look at where, say, so I think the challenge for the Anasazi is that they were a culture of the Great Basin, which just barely intruded into the Rocky Mountains. If you look at the location of Mesa Verde, for example, it's just barely in the Rocky Mountains. The area around it is tribal land. The connection to Anasazi, which means old ones, ancient ones, something like that.
Something like that.
I don't know where you get I don't know how you would make the connection between the word Anasazi or the Anasazi culture and Brown, being the home of Brown, unless you'd look at it. And I don't know how much you knew about Native Americans, but Native Americans are the Native Americans that I grew up with have changed since then because of the influence of modern culture, but were very dark brown skinned with what I would call a red undertone. So I don't know necessarily that they could have been referred to as brown when any other of the southwestern cultures would have had the same, had the very similar coloration. So
let's see. We have, I guess that's Z Brewmeister. Okay, where could Forrest throw his body on the treasure that he wouldn't have to worry about all the animals? Mexico video disturbing the body. He
no place.
wasn't concerned about that. Yeah. He even had a little discussion with Preston and Michael McGarity during the video that you did.
Yeah.
Right, where they talked about he wanted his bones to be returning to the dirt, and that's one of the processes is the animals and the microbes and all.
Yeah. I think it was Fenn's expectation, like all finds that wasn't covered because he wasn't buried. My estimation, our conclusion is that it was hidden, the treasure, in a niche that was big enough for him to place his body there as well, that he would have died, and then over a period of time his body would have either desiccated or it would have been aided in its desiccation by the animals in the area, and eventually his bones would have been scattered someplace other, but that was the nature of things, and he was willing to put up with it. So I don't think the fact that the animals would have disturbed the place, the animals in the place would have disturbed his hiding place by removing it, by effectively gnawing on him and eventually ruining his bones. I don't think that bothered him at all. I think that he believed that to be part of what the natural order of things was, if you will.
Let's see. Sean
NM?
Yes.
Do we have an interview today?
No.
Okay, good.
What is your interpretation of the word riches?
So the word riches, so it depends on who uses the word riches. So if the word riches is used by somebody who has a lower standard of living than Forrest Fenn, riches to them could be a new car or a house with nice furniture. Forrest was not only accomplished, he had accumulated wealth and influence and a collection that gave him a different context. So the definition of riches for any one individual is dependent upon the environment in which they exist. The definition for Forrest of riches could include things like his artifacts, things like the treasures that he discovered, because to him, a cache of Clovis points to him is likely riches, while to a person who's living out on the street could give a damn about the Clovis points and just wonder where the riches of the next meal is coming from. So it's contextual, and like everything Fenn, if you're reading a word, it has to be interpreted in the context of Fenn's knowledge and imagination rather than the generic definition of the word. And I struggle with a lot of the words in the poem in the same way. Riches to Fenn, riches is one of the big ones, treasures is another. Those two words would mean something significantly different to Fenn than, say, a professional archaeologist or anthropologist or Paleolithic professor, and to me. So I always have to interpret those words, not only in terms of the dictionary, but in terms of the context of Fenn, his world, his environment, his imagination, his experience.
Edna Purviance wants to say that the Denver Museum has 2 American Indian paintings, Indians facing opposite directions, which may be important. Check Fenn's website, Santa Fe Trading Company.
Okay. Thank you, Edna.
Lori James, but he said he was 79 or 80 when he hit it.
Okay, so if you go back to pre-2017, Forrest never said he was 79 or 80 when he hit it. What he said was variations on the following phrase. Don't go someplace where a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go. Now, for somebody who specializes in communications, they would know right at that point, at the moment he finished that phrase and the way he said it, that he may or may not be referring to himself. He could be referring to the fact that the place where he put the treasure could not be easily accessed by someone who was 79 or 80 years old.
Could be.
Not necessarily, pardon me.
Could be accessed.
Could be accessed by somebody who was 79 or 80 years old, and it may not necessarily be him. So if you look at, we actually made a big deal about that in early 2017, and soon after that, he had 2 occasions, both recorded on Dale's site, where he said, I was 79 or 80 when I hid the treasure. So the question at that point becomes he says, I was about 79 or 80 when I hid the treasure. To me, it's funny, you published the book when you were 80. That means you had to hide it when you were about 79, and the question is, how about 79 were you? So I don't believe that Forrest Fenn was 79 or 80 when he hid the treasure. I do believe he hid it in a place where a 79 or 80-year-old person could access it and find it if he wanted to. Now, whether that 79 or 80-year-old person then can carry the 42-pound box out is another question. But you have to go back, and I think we have a video on this where I went back over all the times Fenn had said, don't go where a 79-year-old man, a 79 or 80-year-old person couldn't go. Don't be searching for the treasure or search for the treasure if you're 79 or 80, something like that. But he never said until 2017, I was 79 or 80. 2017, he said 2 things that were completely different from what he has said before that. And before that, he had said, don't go where a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go. Then in 2017, he said 2 quotes, and he hasn't said them since. I was 79 or 80, was about 79 or 80 when I hid the treasure, and I hid the treasure in about 2009, 2010. So he qualified both of them, and just the fact that he said them leaves a lot of questions as to how those sentences were constructed.
Could hiding it in 2003 have been his test run?
Yeah, I think that's one of the conclusions that we came to. If you had hidden it in 2003, and if you didn't tell anybody that you had hidden it in 2003, then you could find out whether or not it would be bumped into. And I think that's the conclusion we came to. So could it be found accidentally? One of the things that was intriguing about the olive jar that he sealed with wax and put in the chest was that he included some of his hair. And the reason he says he included some of his hair, I think it was at Moby Dickens, was so that there was DNA proof that he had hidden the treasure. Well, that's interesting because if you've written a book and you've talked about the poem and you've marketed it in the way that you have, including publishing pictures, photographs of the treasure, you would not need DNA evidence to prove that it belongs to you and you had the right to give it away. The only time you would have required DNA evidence is if you had hidden the treasure and not told anybody about it. These are the circumstances that would have had to occur. You hide the treasure in 2003. Toby and Shelley bump into it while they're hiking in the Pecos in 2005, and now they have a treasure that they don't know to whom it belongs other than what's in that little olive jar, including his hair. And his hair could have proven that he was the original owner of the treasure and that in his poem, or his plan was to give it away, and had worked all of that out. So I want to make a short answer to that. What was the question again?
Could hiding it in 2003 have been his test run?
Yes. It could have been a way to find out whether or not his hiding place was really as good as he thought it was.
Lori James, so he hid the chest before he wrote the book and finalized the poem?
Yes. That's what he said more than once, and just the logic of it had to be true. He had to finalize the poem. He had to hide the treasure, and this is independent of when he hid it. The process would have been hide the treasure, finalize the poem, publish the book. Write the memoirs, publish the book.
Urban, I don't know what the word is, T-L-A-N-T. Do you feel like it's in the Cimarron area?
We have said more than once that there are 8 easily identifiable with geographic specificity locations in northern New Mexico, and Cimarron is one of them.
Rick Plank, do you think Homa Brown might have anything to do with the Philmont Scout Ranch?
Honestly, no, and the reason is I know how the Boy Scouts acquired the Philmont Scout Ranch and how it became a Boy Scout ranch. And it's off location. If you look at where the Philmont Scout Ranch is, it's off location. And again, it boils down to being private property. So you could put in below the Homa Brown, but it's in an area that you're going to find when your boot's on the ground that just doesn't give you much other hope.
And it's covered with Boy Scouts.
And it's covered with brown-coated Boy Scouts.
And they would have found something by now, right?
I spent several parts of my childhood, several summers in my childhood at the Philmont Ranch because my family had a ranch adjacent to it in Taos.
Philly
or
at
outside of
1.
Taos.
Why are you so fixated on New Mexico, and what was just one hint that formed your opinion?
The hint that's in the book. I'll give you that. That's a good question. The hint that's in the book. And I wrote a blog post on it just recently. So the hint that's in the book is Fenn told us in the book, I hid it someplace in the mountains. I hid the treasure. He's referring to the treasure. I hid it someplace in the mountains north of Santa Fe. So the example that I've always used is, let's say your friend calls you and he's going fishing, and he tells you he's going fishing someplace in the mountains north of Santa Fe. Then about a week later, his wife calls you and she says, Bobby Joe hasn't come home from his fishing trip. Do you know where he went? And you were to say to her, well, he probably went to Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana. You wouldn't do that. You would say that he went someplace in the mountains north of Santa Fe because you wouldn't want to mislead her. And I think that is the primary reason we continue to search in New Mexico. Fenn told us it's in the mountains north of Santa Fe. And it wasn't until early in 2013 that Fenn, I always say Fenn discovered the Rocky Mountains. He had never talked about the Rocky Mountains before that. Before April of 2013. There was no mention of the Rocky Mountains. In addition to that, Fenn has never indicated, has never said or written anything about the treasure being in one of 4 states, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana. He's never said that. He said there's a map in his book, Too Far to Walk, and that the treasure is someplace on that map. Well, it just so happens that the mountains north of Santa Fe are on that map. He said that the treasure is in the Rocky Mountains. Well, it just so happens that the mountains north of Santa Fe are the Rocky Mountains. So he's never lied to us. He's always told us where it is. But the only time he's been specific about the location was when he said in the book, before all the marketing that began in 2013, that the treasure is someplace in the mountains north of Santa Fe. He didn't say it was in northern New Mexico or Colorado or Wyoming or Montana.
It's in the mountains.
It's in the mountains north of Santa Fe. That's why we insist. That's because we don't believe anything he said after December 2012. Interesting, but we don't put stock in it.
Cal Lazarus, what do you think of Glacier National Park as where warm waters halt?
I just saw your video on that. I'd highly recommend. We of course are still in New Mexico and there's no Glacier National Park, but I just saw your well done video on that. And so I highly recommend that if anybody has any inclination that the treasure is in Montana, that Mike Cowlings, made a very good case for the Glacier National Park in one of his most recent videos, and I'm going to highly recommend that you go and watch that video.
Okay.
You owe me, Mike.
Steve Klein, is the San Juan River your warm waters halt?
San Juan. No, that's too far west of our search area.
Is anyone?
But before its confluence with the Rio Grande, it makes for some great trout fishing.
William Zimmerman, has anyone asked Fenn if people from his past who have passed away would be able to find the treasure? For example, his father or Sloan.
So I don't know that anyone has ever asked him that, and if I remember correct, I'm trying to remember if someone at Moby Dickens asked him if he had something in a special place, and he bounced around that. So here's what we think. We think that there is a possibility, considering his relationship with both Eric Sloan and his father, and the point at which we don't think it was his brother Skippy. And the reason is Skippy passed away long before this became I don't want to call it a fixation, an interest of Fenn's, but it is highly probable that Fenn shared the location of his special place, and that's how special it was. We did a program several months ago on Fenn's special place. Take a look at that program. We believe that Fenn shared his special place with either or both Eric Sloan and his father, both of whom would have been about 80 at the time, 79 or 80. Thus, the don't go where a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go. It is highly likely that when Fenn makes that statement, he's not referring to himself. He's referring to one or both of Eric Sloan, who he had great admiration, respect, and love for, or his father, for whom he had great admiration, respect, and love. And because this place was so special to him, he wanted to share that special place with them. And now, because they're both dead, only one has to keep the secret.
Okay. Do you think, this is from 11B2P Treasure Finder, do you think line 6 refers to direction, and line 7 refers to distance? You need both to find your next point in land nav.
So line 6 is... Not far, but too far to walk. Yes, we believe that beginning with the first clue, which Fenn has told us is beginning where warm waters halt, that there are, remember the stick map points and lines connecting the dots. Go back to my blog post, the one where I talk about finding that stick chart in the museum, the Frost Museum of Science in Miami. And I refer to that process of point, line, point, line, point, line. And there seems to be a bit of that written into the poem where he establishes a point, a line, meaning a distance and direction, another point, distance and direction, etc., etc. It is connecting the dots. And if you were trying to describe where to go to someone, if you wanted to tell them go to Red River, you would do it. Drive from Albuquerque, 65 from Albuquerque to Santa Fe. When you get to Santa Fe, take 285 north, or whatever, 64. What's north of 285? North through Espanola to Taos. When you get to Taos, go east over the mountains to Angel Fire and Eagle Nest, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how, when you're giving directions, it works. Point, line, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the poem has a lot of that written into it.
This kind of goes along with what we've been talking about. So, David Dow, could it have been in a trip when Forrest's father was 79 or 80 when he discovered his location? Two men can keep a secret.
I would say yes, except that I think Fenn discovered his location on his own. I think it was an accidental discovery. I think it was something that he really thought about. I'm not sure necessarily that he thought about, this is the place I want to die. But I have places. My father had places that he took me that I knew were special to him. And honestly, I've been back to those places, and I try like hell to make them special to me, and they never will be. They're special to my father. And so I have places that I shared with my son, and they're my special places. So I think he had a special place, and that as he got older, and both Sloan and his father got older and closer to their own respective deaths, because they were very similar in age, I think he decided to share that location with them. But I think he shared it with them after he had decided it was special to them. And because he knew they were going to die soon, he could keep the secret. And that Fenn, or that Sloan and or his father could take their knowledge of the special place with them when they passed away.
His dad would have been visiting because he lived in Texas. He didn't live in Santa Fe. So Fenn would have already have seen and known this place, and taken him on a visit.
Yeah.
All right. What, again from Calazars. Wait, no, that's David asking. David asking Calazar something. And Gallant 171 gave us $1 for our super chat.
Every little bit helps.
And here is his or her question. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. Fenn said the first and second clue can be found on a map by a girl in India. How would you define the first clue in relation to a place that can be found on a map?
So the first clue, according to Fenn, is begin at where warm waters halt. To the best of our knowledge, to the best of our research, there is only one place in the western state where the phrase warm waters is used in a context independent of the poem. And warm waters, and I'm going to use this as our example because this is how we get there, warm waters in New Mexico, or the places that warm waters halt, is geographically specific. It is geographically specific because the fishing regulations tell us exactly, precisely. I can tell you that warm waters halt precisely on the Cimarron River, where the eastern boundary of the Tolby campground crosses. That's geographically specific. From there, because water goes down, I would go down the Cimarron Canyon. So you can see that on a map. You can see the point at geographically specific point where warm waters halt, and you can see the canyon down. Those are the first two clues. Take it in the canyon down. Then you have to be boots on the ground, not far but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. Those are things that you will not be able to see on the map because the not far, too far to walk is the distance between where warm waters halt and the put in below the home of Brown. So the little girl in India could find that, and I do all the time. I can point to the 8 locations in New Mexico where quote, warm waters halt, unquote. And I can show you on Google Earth the canyon that goes down. After that, I have to be boots on the ground. If I can do it, the little girl in India could have done it as well.
Okay.
Because she's probably smarter than me.
Honeybee 100. Is it true Fenn said the treasure was close enough to home of Brown to walk to?
Close enough to the home of Brown to walk to. I do not. So here's what he said. Put in below the home of Brown. So what he has, I don't think he's ever used exactly that phrase. Not that I recall anyway. He may very well have been, and maybe one of the other searchers on this live stream can come up with it. I don't recall him saying that. What he has said, by the way, beginning in 2012, and it's been the same since, is that some searchers have been, and I think this was 2 different statements. Some searchers have figured out the first 2 clues, meaning they've figured out where warm waters halt and then where to take the canyon down. The implication being that they haven't quite figured where the put in below the home of Brown was. But then he also said that some searchers have been within 200 feet of the treasure. That doesn't actually tell us anything about where they were in the context of the clues, because he's also said many people have been within 500 feet of the treasure. And in both cases, I think he said whether it was 200 feet or 500 feet, they didn't know it. They didn't know they were that close to their treasure. And so the implication to me is the 500 feet, lots of people have been within 500 feet, is that there's a road that is within 500 feet of the treasure, and there's lots of people driving up and down that road. The 200 feet is they got in below the home of Brown, parked their car, bounced around for a while, but went in the wrong direction because he says they told me where they were, and they went right past the treasure. So that could mean a lot of things, but I don't remember specifically him saying that exactly.
I think it's based on the supposition that put in below the home of Brown is where he parked his car, and then he says that he did walk from his car.
Yeah.
He made 2 trips with the treasure to put it in the hiding spot.
Right.
So it's an assumption, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. We assume that just because of the way he describes what he did.
All right. B.J. Chambly, what do you think of his statement, I could go right straight to it?
You know, it's interesting. I'm sure that he could. I have no doubts that he could, because I don't think, I think as he gets older, it becomes less and less likely that he will pursue that. He doesn't even like driving at this point, according to him. I don't know necessarily that it would be easy for him to go right straight to it, but I can go right straight back to my favorite fishing spots. I can go back right straight to the trail that leads me to Spirit Lake above Santa Fe in Hyde State Park, above Hyde State Park. So I can go back to those places, but after a time, I'm going to have either a GPS with me or a map with me, because time wears on your memory of what that area looked like at any given point in time. And over a 20-year period, the forest or the place in which you would put it, the forest will change that for you. It's not going to be, I don't think it has an impact necessarily on the clues, but I think if he were to go back today, I think he would have more difficulty finding his special place than he would have imagined, just because the forest changes. From year to year, it changes.
Sean and M, what are your thoughts on Forrest's mention that some may have solved the first 4 clues, but he is not certain?
We are not certain. I don't think we're any more certain that that he is, that would have put, he said, and the other interesting thing to me is that he said that once and hasn't said it before or since. So I don't think I'm any more certain about someone having solved the first 4 clues than he is, because that would take you warm water salt, canyon down, put in below the Homer Brown, and no place for the meek, right?
And you could solve the clues, but the final answer may not
Yeah.
have been the right one, because we talked about, the first 5 clues, was it, to get to Devil's Slide?
Yeah,
Yeah, and we don't think it's there.
Yeah.
Other people have actually already looked there as well, so.
yeah. I don't think we're any more certain about anyone finding the first 4 clues than he is. But of course, we don't have any idea what other searchers are doing. It could very well be that other searchers have gotten to the first 4 clues or gotten to place. I've seen people on the forums claiming that they've got the blaze. So
Mary
I think you just have to take those things with a grain of salt and keep doing your own search.
Green says, is the poem in the chest?
A good question. I don't know. He said he miniaturized his autobiography, placed it in the jar, so it is very likely that incorporated into that autobiography is a copy of the poem as well. But I couldn't tell you. He's never indicated that it either was or wasn't.
Brian Schultz, have you found 2 really good clues in The Thrill of the Chase that supports your solution of the poem?
Clues, no. Hints, yes. The most obvious, and I'll go back to the most obvious one, where he tells us it's someplace in the mountains north of Santa Fe. That has to be the major hint for us.
Belva Jenkins, why have you eliminated the mountains west of the Rio Grande?
That's a really good question. Honestly, the correct, we have, okay, I'm going to answer your question straight, and you can either agree with me or not. It's not Fenny enough. It's simply not. We've been west of the Rio. We've been in the area west of the Rio Grande. Once you get west of the Rio Grande, your ecology, your height and ecology changes dramatically, and it's simply not Fenny enough.
It's very deserty.
Yeah, it's high desert. It's not.
A lot of cactus.
It's not a lot of cactus. There's some mesquite and sagebrush, but it's not that combination of water and
pine trees
and riparian. It's not riparian, I guess, is the correct answer.
If your solves don't work out, and this is Cheyenne Dowler, if your solves don't work out in New Mexico, where will you look next? We haven't finished looking here yet.
Yeah, we've got a lot to do in New Mexico. We're going to spend the spring search season pretty much dedicated to locations in New Mexico. We're going to focus there. We don't know necessarily until something just jumps out at me based on additional research, where we have to look at it and say, "Oops, I was wrong." And it's not that we haven't done that before, but when we do, we get to the alternative place, and you realize right away it just doesn't fit. It's not Fenn. So no, we're going to stick with New Mexico, and going to Cimarron or Red River or wherever is a hell of a lot cheaper for us than going to Lander, Wyoming, or Yellowstone Park. We looked at the numbers for Yellowstone Park. It's 2 month wages, 2 months retirement income.
Yeah, exactly. On the grind acting, how do you know it's still even out there?
Because no one has announced its discovery. We have to. You have to believe that Fenn hid a treasure. If you don't, then don't waste your time. If you don't believe he hid the treasure, stay home and do something interesting. Other than look for Fenn's treasure. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to assume that somebody, when once the treasure is found, is going to let us know they found it, whether anonymously or not. No one is going to find the treasure and not announce the find. We're not even going to do that. We may do it anonymously, but there's no reason for us to keep the find of the treasure itself. That's That's actually after all the work that you put into it. Can you imagine, I think Fenn once said, the person that's looking for this treasure and finds this treasure is the kind of person that's going to want the world to know it. So we haven't heard that. We've heard people make videos about finding holes and not agreeing, but if you do any kind of research into that, you find out that, their solutions fall apart after clue 3. But they did find a hole. That's not the treasure.
And one of the reasons we do want to make sure that everybody knows it has been found is there's a certain liability attached. If anybody goes looking for that treasure after it's already been found and they die, when you could have prevented that by just letting people know it had been found.
Whether you want to do it anonymously or not.
Yeah. Okay. Anything new on the accidental clue at Denver or anywhere else? No. You
just gotta put up with Preston. Preston is a good marketing guy. He loves Fenn. He's going to help Fenn market his latest book. So Preston is going to say, and yeah, there are clues in this book as well. So we talked about the postmarks in Once Upon a While. We thought the one postmark associated with Mummy Joe is interesting because it was so different, and we think maybe there's something to do with Mummy Joe. If I was going to Yellowstone, I'd check out that area of the park where that excavation is, but there was just nothing in Denver for us, except some really good food.
Yeah.
What was that restaurant? We went to a restaurant in Colorado Springs called the Famous Restaurant? The Famous Steakhouse?
House, yeah, I think that was it.
Oh my God! If you ever get to Colorado Springs, it's downtown, old downtown Colorado Springs. Go to the Famous Restaurant or Famous Steakhouse.
All of our meals were pretty darn good.
Yeah, but
that one at the ranch house with the smoked prime rib.
Oh yeah, the ranch house, that was good. Yeah, that was good.
In Santa Fe.
In Santa Fe, the ranch house. But that one at that Famous Steakhouse, it was so cool because Shelley mentioned to the waiter that it was my birthday. He asked, like waiters do, they came up and asked us if we wanted a dessert, and we said, nah, which is...
You said, do you have any pineapple upside down cake?
Yeah, which is my traditional birthday, which is another story I got to tell you, which is
we had a little cooking disaster on his birthday cake.
So I launched into, it's my birthday and things like that, and the next thing I knew, he brought us out a little very nice, actually, multi-layered chocolate ganache with cream cake with a candle on it, and had the foresight not to sing happy birthday to us, but we enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you made a wish.
The Famous Steakhouse.
You got to blow out the candle and everything. Urban Tyant, I'm going to say. Fenn poured the ashes of a close friend out his plane window. That was Olga. Mm-hmm. Could she be the two people can keep a secret if one is dead?
She could be. I don't get a sense in anything that Fenn has written or said about her that it was anything more than a respectful business relationship because she lived in his apartment attached to the museum. I'm sorry, his gallery.
No, she lived in that building that he wanted to buy, and she wouldn't move until she died. And then he could buy that place, right?
Oh, but it was associated with his gallery rather than his house. Right, he wanted
to expand.
Yeah, so I think it was a respectful and courteous relationship. I'm not sure it was the kind of relationship that she could have been, she could have been aware of his desires. And of course, this all occurred before his relationship with Olga was all before 1988 when he was diagnosed with cancer. So I don't know that they're necessarily tied together. And if I remember correctly, the area on which he put her ashes because he couldn't find Taos Mountain, so he put it in the general area, was over tribal land.
Jason Hilgerson, what kind of Lateran, I don't know what that is,
Spell it.
Lateran, was that he showed on the Nightline interview? Lateran?
It was a lantern. It was actually an old Hispanic candelabra made of wrought iron and a wick. And you can see those. As a matter of fact, there are samples of those in the Museum of Spanish Colonial Arts in Santa Fe. So yeah, it was a lantern / candelabra, and what I assume it was Hispanic. It could have just as easily been Mideastern with his travels there. But anytime you have that twisted wrought iron, it's going to be from this area. It's going to be Hispanic.
Laurie James, fishing regulations won't last 100 years or 1,000.
No, they won't. But when you do your research, you're going to have to do it in the context of Fenn's time. So you're right. The fishing regulations won't last, but then the forest won't last, the location won't last, the geology won't be the same. None of that will be, everything will have changed in 1,000 years, including the fishing regulations. But you have to do your research in the context of the time period in which Fenn hid his treasure. So you'd have to go back and say, what were the fishing regulations back then?
Mm-hmm. Even rivers can change course.
Yeah, exactly. All of it's going to change. So that's why you have to have a starting point, and the starting point is the early 2000s, the period in the early 2000s. What was the world like then, not what the world is like in the early 3000s. And neither of us, of course, will have to worry about it then.
AJ21, what aspect of Native culture connect to the poem? And should we listen to Fenn when he says to simplify?
So let me answer your second question first. The answer is yes, simplify. The aspect of Native American culture has to do with the Paleolithic period because Fenn had an interest in it. And there are two things that come out of the Paleolithic period for us and perhaps the poem. One is special place. And the special place could somehow be related to the Paleolithic culture in which he found something related to them. And that find could have been anything from a spear point to a petroglyph or a pictogram. So I don't know necessarily that any of that is written into the poem. I think it is more associated with a special place. When I look for a special place, I look for a cross between ecology, riparian, Native American, or the Native American cultures, things like that they have an anthropological, Paleolithic, archaeological, and modern fishing, camping history. That's the tie-in for a special place.
David Dow wants to know if you know where's the best place to find an old map from the 50s, 60s, or 70s. The best places are libraries in universities. They're very good about their archives. The second best place is, if you have the chance, is to go to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. The third best place is the Internet Wayback Machine. And the reason is I've found maps on the Internet that date back to the 1800s. Late 1800s, early 1900s. But if I was looking for the original versions of those maps, I would go to the university libraries, and generally speaking, you could go to the, if they have a geology department, the geology department can help you with those. And the U.S. Geologic Survey, USGS. They have a collection of maps that you have access to. Jimmy Korn, didn't he say, if I told you where Home of Brown is, you'd walk right to it?
I think he did, but I'm not sure he wasn't. I don't think he was referring to the treasure. I think he was referring to Home of Brown, meaning if I told you where my Warm Waters Halt is, you could go right there. So I think his logic was, if I told you where the Home of Brown was, you could go right to the Home of Brown, not that you could go to the treasure.
I've read Sim 8213. I've recently read the book Thrill of the Chase. I don't believe there is a mention relating to New Mexico.
That's correct. None of the states, none of the locations. There is no. There are 5 references to New Mexico in the book, and they're all associated with the, where the book was published, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't refer to New Mexico except in terms of the description, the memoirs associated with his later life, the gallery, Peggy in their new house, et cetera, et cetera. he spends far more time talking about his youth in Yellowstone. But as we said, and I'm going to go back and refer you to the video that we did on Special Place. Special places are not something you establish in your youth. They require complex thinking of an adult. So we believe that his special place was associated with his adult thinking, and he was in New Mexico from 1972 on. That means he was in New Mexico from the age of 42 on, and that would make it significant in terms of him determining what his special place was. Yellowstone is not his special place. It's his family's, probably more his father's special place, maybe even Skippy's special place. But his special place, we believe, as you'll see in that video, is associated with a period after 1972.
This is 11B2P Treasure Hunt Finder. So where Warm Waters Halt has a clue, number 1, then direction plus distance, then home of Brown, be clue number 2. I don't think direction and distance are actual clues, just implied directions. They are different, I believe.
Yeah, we believe that the poem is written like the stick chart of the Polynesians. Sticks and I was going to say sticks and stones, but sticks and shells. So if you look at it as the connection between dots, places on a map, and distances and directions, we think it's structured like that.
So.
Is that it?
Cheyenne Dowler wants to know why do you think he says worth the cold? Do you think you have to get into water at some point?
Short answer is no. We do think that if you've spent any time in the woods, you could have a day in the spring or fall, if not the winter, that it's going to be cold. Evenings above 5,000 feet, above 7,000 feet, it gets pretty chilly at night. And it gets chilly early on in the evening. You're going to have to put a jacket on at 5 o'clock in the afternoon once the sun sets. Once the sun sets over the mountaintops, the temperature goes down dramatically. So, no, we don't think it has anything to do with walking through water.
Okay, I'm going to say that's
Is that
good
it?
for today. If you have further questions, Toby will answer them by typing. We've hit 1.5 hours, so
Wow.
I'm tired of standing. I don't know about you.
Well, we're going to start losing batteries here
Yeah,
soon.
our lights are going to go out in a minute.
Yeah.
So let's close it down. But we thank you for all of your comments and questions today. And as I said, Toby likes to go through the chat, copy it, put it up on our blog, and he'll also look at any questions that we may have missed and try to answer those as well.
Yeah.
So don't forget to give this video a thumbs up because YouTube likes that. Subscribe to our channel to receive notifications of live stream activity like what happened today. Everybody was here right away, ready to go because the notifications went out. And if you haven't gotten a notification, click on the bell.
Keep them busy for a second.
And you should get a little quote marks around your bell, and that will tell you that you are subscribed to get notifications as well. Check out our blog at www.agypsieskiss.com. We have just put up a bunch of pictures from our Denver trip, so you can see those there and get a closer look at the room where Toby thinks that Colorado clue resides. And follow us on Instagram. We've just really gone to town on our Instagram this last week. We're putting up short videos and photos, and we're going to be putting up more every day, as well as little posters that give you, notification that we're going to go live or something exciting is coming up. And that is _Gypsies_Kiss on Instagram, and you can find us there. Oh, there went one of our lights.
Batteries.
And
Yeah,
something you wanted to say about Friday?
So a couple of things. Number one, once this goes away, once this chat goes away, we lose all the chat from here. So make sure that if you have any comments or questions, once this video goes up on YouTube, you can add comments or questions. You won't see this except on our blog. But if you have any comments or questions, add your comments or questions
Right, to the comment box.
to the comment box below. Okay? Do you want to tell them about your Friday surprise?
Well, it is a surprise, and it's actually not for them. It's for new people. These guys are all old hands at this.
Yeah. All right. Well, then don't worry about the Friday surprise. It's not going to be of interest to anybody who's been in the search for a while.
Yeah, it's for new people.
It's for the newbies, huh?
Yeah, but it's going to be fun. Anyway, all right. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in and asking your questions, and for super chat from Bill Cross and the other one, Gallant 171. Thank you so much for participating in super chat today. We appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching, and we will be back here again next Tuesday, 1 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. We'll see you then for Gypsy's Kiss the Vlog. I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. I want to thank our moderators for helping us get through another pretty long stream this week without any problems. We truly appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you guys again. One of these days I'll be able to repay you with all of that. So stay tuned. We'll see you next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I'm Toby Eunice. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.